started for our last session with Michele, and so we'll have also the last stretch before to touch, at least in our fantasy and metaphorically, the Holy Land. So after having done all the steps, we are now almost there. And well, let's go.
Thank you, Ivan. Well, as Ivan told, I won't be touching the Holy Land proper, but I will concentrate today on the last stretch in the pilgrims' travel to the Holy Land, which is in some ways the most complicated one, especially from a geographic viewpoint. As you probably remarked, Venetian ships were enabled from Venice until Rhodes to sail while having always the coastline at their horizon. But here, this is no longer possible, because if you want to make a stop in Christian lands, you cannot go along the Turkish, Cilician and Syrian coast. It would be in a way also very long and complicated, but also dangerous, because such lands belong for the most of this period to either the Ottomans or the Mamluks. So it wouldn't be safe to go along these routes. Moreover, there are many pirates, Turks and Greeks, who own ships they use regularly to attack any boat sailing in this stretch of sea. So basically, if you want to sail from Rhodes, you have to expect that the crossing may be extremely dangerous, because you will be, for the most part of the time, in an open sea. And this is something sailors fear regularly, because especially if you have no wind and you find yourself far from the coast in the middle of the sea, you run the risk of losing your direction. So this might be extremely dangerous. Well, the stretch of sea takes its name from the city of Antalya on the Turkish coast, which is located to the east of Rhodes in the ancient area of Lycia. From time to time, this port came to be into Christian hands, especially in the mid 14th century. The Cypriots, the king of Cyprus, Peter I of Lusignan, was able to capture the city as well as other ports on the southern Anatolian coast. So from time to time it happened that pilgrims also disembarked in this port of call and made efforts to locate local attractions, so from a devotional religious viewpoint. So we have, for example, some evidence from Ludolf von Südheim, who was in Antalya in the 1330s approximately, and he remarked that this city was also a cosmopolitan one, which is in a way a sort of refrain which is repeated in all of such ports, because the composite population is striking for a Western viewer. Well, he remarks that there is a Greek quarter, a Turkish one, and a Jewish one. Is obviously more attracted by the Greek quarter, especially because he has the possibility to visit a church where he can find a local cult phenomenon, which is of much interest because local Christians worship there an icon attributed to the evangelist Luke, which is also known from earlier sources. Apparently, it was associated with a famous cult phenomenon in Constantinople, that of the weekly miracle of the Blacherne Church. Even here in Antalya, there was a similar miracle according to which a veil descended along the surface of the icon at regular times during the week. It's difficult to say what, where this icon was kept, but the ruins of the present-day Al-Adi Mosque, which is known to have been a church devoted to the Virgin Mary, is the best candidate. Okay, but as I told you, Antalya was visited only rarely, only in those periods when it was possible. For the most part, pilgrims went straight from Rhodes to Cyprus along two possible sea routes. The first one, which you probably can see here, anyway, was, okay, I can perhaps show. No, not even the cursor is visible. Okay, in any case, from Rhodes, one of the most important sea routes, which was widespread and became ordinary in the later times, that is, in the 15th century, was from Rhodes town to Paphos, with just one stretch. Whereas in previous times, in the 14th century, the regular path was through the northern coast until to Famagusta. Famagusta was located, as you see, in the on the eastern side of Cyprus, and it faced actually the Syro-Palestinian coast. We will see that this was a very important city in the 14th century. But, okay. The Gulf of Antalya was probably considered to be the most dangerous stretch of sea in the experience of Holy Land pilgrims, because, as I repeat for the first time, the crossed the open sea. Well, this experience was frequently associated with a number of religious symbolisms. The sea was the Gulf of Antalya was known to be very stormy, but pilgrims were said, probably by sailors basically, that it had been even more stormy and almost impossible to cross before Saint Helena had in some way sanctified its waters by throwing in it one of the nails used for the crucifixion of Jesus. Then there were several variants according to which she would have thrown a cross made of the silver used for the basin where Christ had washed his apostles' feet, and this was the same cross that pilgrims saw in St. John of Colacion in Rhodes. So there was a sort of connection they made about with this object. But let's say that the most widespread variant pretended that the waters themselves had been sanctified by a nail which was still preserved in the deep of the sea. So, for example, Santo Brasca, voltassimo la prora verso Rodi, pur per il colfo de Satalia. Satalia is ancient Italian for Antalya, il quale colfo è molto pericoloso per i molti scogli sono coperti. There are many rocks against which the ship runs the risk to crash against. E nel dicto colfo, Sancta Elena, tornando da Gerusalemme con gli chiodi con li quali fu ficto sulla croce il nostro Redentore. So Helena, when crossing this stretch of sea with, after coming from Jerusalem after the invention of the Holy Cross, e ritrovandosi lì con grandissima fortuna, dubitando di perire, buttò uno chiodo nell'acqua. So, the Empress's ship was caught by a terrible storm, and she was afraid she was going to die, so she decided to throw one of the nails of Christ's crucifixion into the waters of the Gulf of Antalya. E subito il mare si abbonazzò e diventò tranquillo. So immediately the sea became quiet. In questo colfo noi et Dio stessimo in Bonazzo senza vento circa 16 giorni. So this is the most terrible experience for Santo Brasca. He found himself in the middle of this sea with no coast at the horizon for 16 days. And without any wind. So the ship was obliged to stay there without moving, or almost without moving. So it was also a very uncomfortable situation because this happened col più estremo caldo del mondo. So there was a terrible heat. So that you were obliged to drink more water, and provisions of water could diminish very quickly. So a decision has to be taken, and what does the captain do? Onde che il patrono, vedendo questa, domandò tutti i peregrini e si fece portare tutta quell'acqua del fiume Giordano che avevano e la gettò in mare, perché si dice che tanto che l'acqua del Giordano sta in Galea, che il mare sempre sta in bonazza. So this is it's difficult to decide what is a religious belief and what is a superstition specific for sailors, but in any case, it is suggested that presence of water from the river Jordan may cause the sea to stay quiet for many days without any possibility to move further. So the captain obliges actually all pilgrims to throw their most precious souvenirs into the waters of the Gulf of Antalya. This engenders a movement, so to say. The water of the river has the power, so to say, to urge the waters of the sea to be activated again. Well, then, this is not sufficient if the behavior within the ship does not conform to pious standards. So, for example, the captain forbids all games. So you shouldn't play cards, you shouldn't play dice during this moment, because God may be disappointed by a common sailor's behavior. And immediately after that, the wind reappears and the ship can move further. The evidence we find in Anselmo Adorno's travelogue indicates that the other variant was also known, that connecting this episode in St. Helena's life with the famous relic kept in Rhodes, the one of the cross, made out of the metal or the silver, or the basin with which Jesus had washed the apostles' feet. '15th century pilgrims arrived to Paphos, but as I was saying before, this was due to the emergence of Paphos as an important port of call, was a late phenomenon. Between 1374 and 1454, Famagusta was under Genoese rule. So it was no longer safe for Venetian ships to stop there. This led to the emergence of Paphos as an alternative port of call along the Cypriot coast. Paphos is located exactly on the opposite side of the island, on its western side, and it owned a number of old ruins which started being identified as mementos connected with the passage of the Holy Apostles, and especially St. Paul, because St. Paul was described in the Acts of the Apostles as having been in Cyprus, but Cyprus was also the homeland of another personage of the apostolic era, Saint Barnabas. So pilgrims were willing to locate in Paphos some memoirs of their activity in the island, even if practically the Gospel, the Scriptures, give us only very limited information about their deeds in Cyprus. Anyway, they were attracted by the Franciscan Church, which is now partially preserved with many later restorations, and in the ruins of the old Roman city just close by, they located St. Paul and Barnabas prison. Actually, it was normally it was located within a cave, located just below the Franciscan Church. Then another local attraction which is exploited by pilgrims in the late 15th century are the Catacombs of Hagia Solomoni, which are still today an important pilgrimage site in Paphos, to such an extent that you immediately recognize this place because of the many clods hanging from a nearby tree, which is a very specific Near Eastern way of honoring the holy sites. Plants and trees located close to the holy sites are hollowed by their closeness to the site-bound sanctity of the nearby caves. And the tradition emerges according to which this cave would have been the place where the seven sleepers would have spent so many years in the period of persecutions. So it was a very odd story which is repeated frequently because of that. Actually, it was an ancient chapel from the 12th century with paintings and it can be supposed that the, its old-fashioned appearance may have played a role in soliciting the identification of the place with something considered to be very ancient. Well, there are many variants, but normally they speak of 7 people who lived during the period of persecutions of martyrs, Christian martyrs, and by grace of God, they slept for about 50 years, and when they woke up, they found a completely different world. But there are many variants of this story, and pilgrims never give many details about that. What is important is the cave itself. The fact that they think that this cave is to be regarded as something holy. And in this sense, worship for caves is an anticipation of the Holy Land, because caves mark the most important holy sites. The cave of Bethlehem, the cave of Nazareth. There is no special need to have an underground holy site in Nazareth, but because the Crusader Basilica was completely destroyed, they addressed their devotion to an underground room which was still preserved and marked by majestic columns. So, or even the cave of Abraham or Adam under the Golgotha in Jerusalem and so on. So in Paphos or in Famagusta, they start worshipping caves, which is something we may anticipate a feature which is typical of the Holy Land. And the same was for the prison of St. Barnabas and Paul in the nearby place. Well, as I was telling, these holy sites do not emerge before Paphos is involved in the normal sea route to the Holy Land. And the same can be said for this very odd shrine on the south of the Akrotiri Peninsula to the south of Limassol. So we are on the southern coast of the island of Cyprus, in a place which is still nowadays a very wild place, in the sense that it is not even that accessible. It is presently included in a British military base, and it's one of the most strange places I ever visited, because I remember when I went there, I first met with a British colonel who was feeding cats, and this was a very strange vision. Then I went further and I came to a small monastery which is completely reconstructed nowadays, but it includes elements of a medieval church which was frequently restored in the course of time. But what impresses you when you go there is the presence of cats everywhere. There are hundreds of cats, and you see here in the picture, all arches are inhabited by cats. This is inside the nuns' cloister. And the nuns are, their basic activity apart from praying is to feed such cats, which are brought there from everywhere in Cyprus. So it's a very curious, tradition, but it was so strong in the 15th century that even the peninsula came to be named Capo delle Gatte, or Capo Gatta, or Cape Gata. So the connection with cats is extremely important. In a way, the presence, the quantity, the crowd of cats is the visual element which reveal the sanctity of the site and its memorial qualities. And I will explain why this is said very clearly, for example, by Anselmo Adorno in 1470. It's the Italius cavus, there is another cape, quivocatur cavus delegato, so which is named Cape Gata. Apud quem monasterium est ditissimum Sancti Georgii, in quo calogeri habitant. Nearby there is a monastery, a very rich monastery in honor of St. George, where Greek monks live, calogeri. Vocaturque monasterium Gattorum, and it is named the Monastery of the Cats, quia fratres ibi ad hoc deputati sunt, ut gattos secum teneant. Because there are monks whose function is to keep cats with them. Usque de numerum 1000, up to 1,000 cats can live there. Sunt enim in patria ubi monasterium est, angues et serpentes in copia parvi qui morsu homines occidunt. In the country there are many snakes which are poisonous and can kill the people. Gattinanque isti dietim ad sonum tube ad venationem serpentum accedunt. So they play a trumpet and the cats gather to kill the snakes, to fight with the snakes. Ad sonumquem tube domi ad capiendum cibum redeunt. And again, when they play the trumpet, the cats come back to be fed. Itaque patria per gattos ive cattos a serpentibus mundatur. So there are practically no snakes on Cyprus because of these cats who fight against them. We don't know how old this tradition was, but it's interesting that it was involved practically in the experience of Holy Land pilgrims because of its oddity, I think. There was no special reason why it should have been invested with particular clues or qualities revealing the specific holiness of the site. It's the presence of all these cats which makes the place holy. But in a number of pilgrims relate that this tradition stems again from St. Helena's voyage from Jerusalem to Constantinople. She would have decided to establish this tradition, and she would have even sent cats from Constantinople to the Akrotiri Peninsula in order to free the island from the perils of snakes. So again, St. Helena, the coasts of Cyprus are invested with memorial meanings associated especially with this archetypical voyage of Constantine's mother, and you have to consider that this voyage was considered to be in some way a sort of archetypical pilgrimage. She was the first Christian empress. She had established the practice of pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and obviously all stops of her voyage from Jerusalem to Constantinople were regarded as worship-worthy. Okay? But let's come again to the crossing of the Gulf of Antalya, because I was insisting on the fact that this was a very perilous, dangerous situation. It was all obviously so also in the 14th century when the ship was directed to Famagusta. The description of a storm in the Gulf of Antalya by Giacomo da Verona is particularly impressive and informative, so I will read it. In die natus Ioannis Baptiste desero, Galeam ascendimus, et prospero vento flante, insulam Crete descendimus, recommandantes nos Deo et Beate Mariae, et insulam Scarpati transeavimus. So from Crete he moves towards Scarpathos, and at that point, indumen semus in Gulfo Satalia in medio pelagi, longe a terra perducenta miliaria. So again, we have a description of the fear of being in the middle of the open sea. Visitavit nos Deus, quad ille Gulfus tantas inundationes facit, tantas conquassationes, ut tota una die et una nocte timeremus naufragium ultra quam centum vicibus. For 100 times he fears a shipwreck because of the stormy wind agitating this ship. Unde cooperuerunt totam Galeam ab uno capiteus quadalium et omnes naute erant a fluctibus balneati. So all sailors were completely washed by the waves of the stormy sea. Ego autem cum magno timore stabam in Scandalaria, clausis portis Galee, et rogabam Deo toto corde, ut nos Deoc grandi periculo liberaret. So he stays practically in the dormitory and he prays because he fears death. Facta in mari tranquillitate, then the sea becomes suddenly calm, and there is a favorable wind, so he gets to Rhodes, or towards Rhodes, et ad insulam Cyprum cum magno timore pervenimus, quod, so you see, he is happy to have escaped a terrible storm in the Gulf of Antalya, but the perils are not yet finished, because the ship is attacked by a pirate. Ad insulam Cyprum cum magno timore pervenimus, quod unus pirata crudelis spoliator maris Bartolomeus Malopulos, a Greek, erat iuxta nos vel propincus nobis, tamen Dei auxilio mediante evasimus manus sua, we escaped from his hands, et pervenibus ad civitatem Paphum. Giacomo da Verona travels in the 1320s, and Paphos is not yet an important port of call, as I was saying. So the ship decides to stop there only to escape from the hands of Bartholomew Malopulos, the pirate, the Greek pirate. Yep. If we look again at the Sante Parole, we will recognize that only 2 holy sites are mentioned in Cyprus, which were associated with the needs of navigation. That is, Santa Maria del Cavo di Famagusta and the Verace Croce di Cipri, the Holy Cross of Cyprus. So we understand that Paphos means nothing in the original habits of sailors. And the final goal in this area of the world is the town of Famagusta. Famagusta is one of the richest ports in the Mediterranean. After the fall of Acre, all mercantile activities which were formerly based in Acre were moved to this place, which is clearly a known place, a known lieu. It practically did not exist before the fall of Acre in 1291. It suddenly came to be reshaped as an important port town immediately after this event. Over there lived a very composite population, including all kinds of religious and linguistic communities. So there were Latins, local Latins, that is, people coming from France, but also a great many Italian merchants from different towns. There were also Catalans, but these people shared this tiny space of this walled town with many other communities, including Arab Christians of many different denominations, such as Western Syrian, East Syrians, Maronites, and Palestinian Christians, of Greek Rite, that is Melkites, Arab Melkites. There were also Armenians from Cilicia, there were Copts, there were Ethiopians, there were Georgians. So it was a really, let's say, a melting pot of the period. The skyline of Famagusta was dominated by the imposing Latin Cathedral of St Nicholas, which is not by chance that St Nicholas was selected as the patron saint of this poor town. Practically, it can be said that the most important products of the period, especially luxury goods of any kind, were brought to Famagusta. This was the place where merchants from throughout the Mediterranean gathered in order to get some of the most important luxury goods from the east. And the town was also provided with a monumental appearance, an incredibly rayonnant Gothic cathedral, as I was saying. And efforts were made, obviously, also to provide such buildings with holy mementos. Probably the most interesting strategy was worked out by Peter I of Lusignan. It has to be said that under the rule of this king, but already during that of his predecessors, attempts were made to transform Famagusta in a sort of New Jerusalem, especially on political grounds. Famagusta and its Cathedral of St Nicholas was the place where the kings of Cyprus were crowned as kings of Jerusalem, because the title of King of Jerusalem was given to the kings of Cyprus. So they were crowned twice, in Nicosia as kings of Cyprus and in Famagusta as kings of Jerusalem. So attempts were made to invest the local churches with some resounding of the cult phenomena of the Holy Land. For example, we know from some sources that the king of Cyprus made agreements with the Mamluk Sultan to obtain a significant portion of the column of flagellation which was preserved in the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. We don't know if it ever reached Famagusta, but attempts were made. Otherwise, Peter of Lusignan made what he could to enrich and to enhance the holiness of his royal cathedral. And we know that he organized an expedition against Myra. Myra was, in that period, in Ottoman hands. It was the place where St. Nicholas had been bishop on the Lycian coast. So he made an expedition over there, not to get the relics, because the relics had been translated first to Bari, and then, according to Venetians, to Venice, in much earlier times. But some other sources indicate that there was a sort of surrogate cult object replacing the absence of St. Nicholas' body relics. And this was an icon representing him and regarded as a sort of true portrait of the saint made during his lifetime. This icon was brought to Famagusta and exhibited permanently within the town cathedral. What happened of it? It was probably burnt, I suppose. It was probably burned in 1571 when the Turks, the Ottoman Turks, finally conquered the port town of Famagusta after approximately 1 year of siege. The siege of Famagusta was one of the most famous in military history, and practically it became possible only when an Ottoman soldier sacrificed himself by throwing him into a. So, you know, there was a door of the city which was occupied with an enormous rod with a pointed rod, and he sacrificed himself with his horse to stop this machine erected by the Venetians. And his name was Jambulat, and if you go there, there is still the bastion of Jambulat, which became a sort of holy site for the Ottomans. Anyway, after the conquest, the Ottoman conquest, the Cathedral of St. Nicholas was transformed into the main mosque, the Friday Mosque of the city. And it's striking, but not that striking, that all tomb slabs on the pavement were removed, apart from one, that of a bishop whose name was Leonard de Nabino. A bishop, this guy was the bishop who ruled the Famagusta Cathedral when the icon of St. Nicholas was translated to his church. So, if you go there, you can experience what happened to me, which is very odd if you want, but not that odd. Well, I entered the mosque, I kept my shoes off, and after a while, when I was looking around, a lady, a veiled lady, a Muslim lady, came to me and proposed to show me the tomb of St. Nicholas. So we went to the northern aisle, and she opened this structure and showed me the tomb of Leonardo Nabino, of this bishop. And then she started making the Muslim proskynesis in front of it. I was puzzled, I have to confess. But this means that there is a sort of local Muslim, Turkish worship for St. Nicholas, which survived even after the fall of Famagusta and its transformation into a completely Turkish city, Turkish and Muslim city. because the Greeks lived outside the walled town. So the city center was a practically only Turkish quarter in Ottoman times. And I think that the selection of this tomb slab as a cultic focus was due to the fact that it was originally located close to the very place where the icon was kept. Given that he was clad as a bishop, his image possessed the iconographic attributes enabling viewers to recognize him as a holy bishop par excellence, as St. Nicholas was. But this indicates to you, it's just one example of many cases in which Muslims and Christians shared an holy site, which is very typical of the Near East, and many cases are known from Palestine. Let's go further. As I was saying, attempts were made to sanctify Famagusta by the kings of Cyprus. So, for example, an obvious connection with Palestine was exploited by promoting worship for one of the water jars of the marriage at Cana. The water jars of Cana are a very easy relic. You can get them very easily because they were supposed to be many. So in many places throughout Europe and the Mediterranean, you can find pottery objects identified as jars of Cana. But this one was a very, very luxury one. It is one of the very few examples of Alhambra vase, which is made with a very particular technique, a very expensive technique, which was typical of the atelier of Andalusia. So it's something imported from Spain, which is put into worship in Famagusta. This vase was so precious that even the Turks didn't dare destroy it. The chief commander of the Ottoman fleet in Famagusta, Lala Mustafa Pasha, decided to appropriate this object and send it as a gift to the Sultan. And one of the Sultan's successors in the 17th century decided to send it as a diplomatic gift to the king of Sweden, and this is the reason why it is presently kept in the National Museum in Stockholm. But it's interesting to see how these luxury objects tend to travel so much. They are never destroyed because they are too precious, and we can reconstruct their history in a very good way. There was a wonderful article by Otto Kris on this object, which is still very fascinating. Well, but it has to be stressed that such the cult phenomena associated with such objects never really attracted pilgrims in such a way as to be regularly visited and mentioned in their travelogues. For pilgrims, a number of other mementos, perhaps less spectacular mementos, were more important than these relics preserved within the walled town of Famagusta. Well, one holy site was connected with the needs of sailing. So again, Giacomo da Verona's Liber Peregrinationis in 1335 explains what pilgrims and sailors do immediately after disembarking in Famagusta. They don't go to the cathedral, they don't go to see the Cana jar, they go to go and visit a cave which is located outside the town. So they have to walk to get there. But basically, they do that because this cave is considered to be especially connected with the needs of navigation in that stretch of sea. And Giacomo da Verona remarks that this is the very place mentioned in the Sante Parole. So, nam in mari, quando cantatur desero salve regina anautis. So, on the sea, when sailors sing Salve Regina, that is the beginning of the Sante Parole, semper unus clamando invocat auxilium primo sancte crucis de Monte Calvarie, and that's the structure of the Holy Word, postea auxilium beate Mariae Virginis de la Cava. Et omnes respondent per multos annos Deus exaudiat in illa ecclesia. Again, the invocation is addressed to a site. It's not just the Virgin Mary, it's the Virgin Mary of the cave, which is the special protector of sailors in that part of the world, on that stretch of sea. So she's the specialist of that sea, or the Gulf of Antalya. If you want to be protected, the first addressee is Our Lady of the Cave in Famagusta. And obviously what you do after you have formulated your vow, you have to fulfill it. And so immediately after disembarking, you have to get there to fulfill your vow. And so it says at the beginning, in die sequenti sive, prima Iuli omnes mercatores et peregrini et naute et marinari ivimus ad ecclesiam Sancte Mariae de la Cava, que est extra civitatem Famaguste, quantum potest diacere arcus bis. So just a short distance, but not a very close one. Et ibi missam devotissime celebravi. So there I celebrated the Mass in a very pious way, et unum magnum cereum seu duplerium obtulimus Virgini gloriosus. And we offered a very big candle to her in fulfillment of their collective vow made during a storm. The Virgin Mary who protected us, who freed us from so many perils when we were on the sea. So this church, Il Ecclesia, is devotissima. It's devotion inspiring, really devotion inspiring, and it est in una caverna. It is underground, an underground space. Et descenditur ad ipsam per gradus triginta sex. So they even count the number of steps to get there, so 36. Et est bene luminosa, et ornata, et picta. It is very, very well lighted, and it's filled with light, it's well ornamented, it's painted, but it's small, it's diminutive actually. Omnes enim de mari venientes statim ad eam accedunt. All those who come from the sea go there immediately. Ibi sunt tres capellani. There are 3 priests who live there practically, who officiate there continuously because of the crowds getting there. And, okay, this is mentioned very frequently in the 14th century. A pilgrim from England remarks that that there are even Englishmen buried in the church nearby, at least, And one other aspect of this place is that it is officiated by both Greeks and Latins. So it's a shared holy site. There are Greek priests officiating according to the Greek Byzantine rite, and Latins who officiate according to the Latin rite. So, for many years, I was obsessed by this place, and I made all possible efforts to locate this cave. Basically, I knew that until 1974, when the northern part of Cyprus was occupied by the Turkish army, there was still a Greek church named Panagia Chrysospiliotissa, Our Lady of the Golden Cave. So I suppose that this replicated the original dedication of the ancient chapel visited by 14th century pilgrims. And well, after many tours and detours, I was able finally to locate it. It's presently used as the Great Mosque in the suburbs of Famagusta. And so you see how it is constructed now. There is a very big bell tower, now used as a minaret, and there is the peculiarity is that you can peep down from these windows, which makes the place a little bit extraordinary. Well, finally, after some negotiations with the local imam, I was able to find a way from the mosque to the underground cave. And I obviously counted the steps. There were 36. It goes underground. There is a sort of natural windows enable you to peep inside, and a door where you can enter this space, a space which is really unique in the sense that it owns two altars. So you see here the altar with the prothesis niche and the diminutive diaconicon, which was originally meant for the Byzantine rite. And I hope you can see something, but it's very dark. Close by is a tiny altar with a Gothic arch. You can see because it's not lit enough. Anyway, this indicates what pilgrims describe, the common celebration of rites according to the Latin and the Byzantine tradition. There are some remnants of paintings, almost nothing is visible. And a big icon of Christ's baptism from the 16th century, which was recently stolen. And what is more striking, a big dome. This is a feature which is not obviously normal for a cave. But obviously, in some way, it is as if they wanted to conform this holy space to one of the most obvious features of a Byzantine Rite church, and something which could mark the holy site from the outside, because it protruded into the surface, into the earthly surface. So it was an emotionally charged experience when I discovered this place. Now, unfortunately, they walled up the entrance, so it's no longer possible. You have to rely on my pictures because until a solution to the Cyprus problem is found, there will no way to get there anymore. This is just to say that, research, historical research may be obstacled by several factors which you cannot foresee, but especially in the Near East, it comes frequently. Okay, should I make a pause now? No? Okay. Okay. Okay, I think we can go further with our trip. And I would like you to make acquaintance with the most important holy site in Cyprus, at least from the viewpoint of pilgrims, of Western pilgrims. That is the Mount of the Cross, the Stavrovouni in Greek. The Stavrovouni is basically one of the most prominent mounts on Cyprus, one which can easily be seen from ships sailing in front of the island. And in the Middle Ages, in the period of Lusignan rule in Cyprus, it was ruled by a Benedictine community. A Benedictine community which probably had substituted a previous Byzantine monastery. In any case, even in connection with the Mount of the Cross on Cyprus, we can say that it was continuously shared by both Greeks and Latins. It was only for both, regardless of each community's specific denomination. Its holiness is described in efficacious terms again by Giacomo da Verona, inter alios. So he remarks that in the island of Cyprus there is a very high mountain which can be seen even from far in the sea, and over this mountain, on the top of this mountain, there is a honorable monastery, honor of the Holy Cross, belonging to the black monks, that is the Benedictines. The holy object preserved in the church, in the monastery church, is a cross, but it's not the cross of Jesus. Obviously, the cross of Jesus was brought by Helena to Constantinople. Over there, she decided to promote worship for the cross of the good thief. Because, you know, according to the legend of the invention of the cross, Helena would have rediscovered the three crosses of the crucifixion, so that of Jesus, that of the bad thief, and that of the good thief. The one belonging to the good thief was put in veneration on the top of Mount Stavrovouni. And there are some peculiarities worth mentioning in connection with it. So Giacomo says, et abetur in magna devotione reverentia, et magnus populus pergit illuc. So there is always a big crowd, a big frequentations by the people, and it is known as the Mount of the Cross. It's not far from Famagusta, and he describes how he himself went there during his stay in the port town. So, ad hoc monasterium monachorum nigrorum sancte crucis de Cipro, accessi recedens de Nicosia, et perveni illuc cum devotione et reverentia, et vidi et stetici. So I saw and touched the hood, that blessed hood, which is worshipped by everybody, and it is invoked by sailors in the ship as the blessed cross of Cyprus. Yeah.
I love really the vidi et stetici, the two like words, videre and tangere. So what's for me interesting is that on the many sites we met, what was allowed was only the videre. For example, in Congo, the classical case, you have Sainte Foy, which is isolated. I mean, you can see her but not touch her.
Yeah.
As well as, in certain sense, it was the case in Mont-Saint-Michel originally, which is not the case anymore, of course. But this duality between vedere and tangere, it's really interesting. And for me, it's like really amazing that here we have insistence on the double kind of worship which is possible and allowed it. And my question is, I think it was because you were not so many crowds, because in general, you have to block the tangere because of course of the crowd. So what it does mean that there were not so many, or there was a different strategy, because such an important relics which can be touched by pilgrims, and it is quite exceptional. You can touch.
I think it depends on the nature of relics in some ways. For example, if you have a thorn or the Holy Crown, as in Rhodes, so small body parts or small contact relics or small pieces in general, which are exhibited all together, in that case the visual experience is that which is recommended regularly. But in the case of bigger relics and of holy sites being used as cult objects, there the physical experience is thorough. So you see and you touch. When you can, at least you touch always, because this is a way of appropriating the holiness, which is much more physical than through the sight. So in the Holy Land, touching is something that everybody does. So you go to the rock of Golgotha and you touch it. And if you don't touch it, you won't really experience it in a proper way. So in this case, as we infer from other sources, the cross was big, and it was also the object, it was involved in a sort of perpetual, permanent miracle. So the holiness was immediately tangible, and you had to do that. I explain, perhaps with the words of Ludolf of Sudheim, so we are more or less in the same period. What we understand from his description is that this huge cross, which was also riveted with silver, was hung actually in the middle in a special chapel, but apparently it was not fixed to any support. So it levitated in the air. And this was something which struck pilgrims very much. So Ludolf says, in ac diecesi estetia mons multum excelsus, so a very high mountain. It's not that high, but the holiness the attribution of holiness makes mountain even higher than what they really are. Monti Tabor multum similis. This is an interesting observation. He is convinced that in some way the holiness of the mountain is also connected with its shape that looks like that of Mount Tabor. In cuius vertice est pulchrum monasterium, on the top of it there is a beautiful monastery, in quo sunt fratres ordinis sancti benedicti, where are monks of the order of Saint Benedict. In hoc monasterio est crux integra, so there is a full cross, which is something strange for believers, for Western believers, because they were accustomed to worship only fragments of the Holy Cross. So here they have a huge full cross in front of them, which is something unusual in their experience. In qua latro ad extris Christi pependit, so the cross of the good thief who was crucified to the right of Christ. Que ibidem per sanctam Helenam est delata, which was brought there by Saint Helen, et hoc monasterium per ipsam est constructum et dotatum. So Helena is considered to be also the founder of the building, which is constructed around the cross as a sort of monumental frame. Eadem crux ab omnibus in mari navigantibus dum prope montem sunt devote salutatur et etiam in eodem monte ob reverentiam dicte crucis multa miracula Deus operatur. So it's also the place where miracles are performed daily. Well, let's go further. Nicola de Martoni is the first to mention that the miracle consists in the very fact that the cross is levitating, is flying in the air, and is not suspended at any chain. Ecclesia ipsa est parva sed multum devota. It's tiny. The church, the monastery church, is tiny, but very much devotion inspiring, piety inspiring. A latere vero dextro ipsius ecclesiae, so to the right aisle of the church, est quedam capella parva. There is a small chapel, which might also mean that there is a sort of ciborium or something framing the holy object. Et ibi manet dicta beata crux sublevata. Et suspensa, it's suspended, que non est adesa in aliquo loco, but it's not fixed to any wall. Quod magnum videtur miraculum, and this is an extraordinary miracle, et est in dicta cruce modicum de ligno beate crucis Domini nostri Iesu Christi copertum argento. So in the middle, there is also a small fragment of the Holy Cross of Jesus. So it's a double relic. It's a relic including another more important relic. And it operates, it works, a permanent miracle by being suspended in the air without any chain. Many pilgrims are struck by this very strange and beautiful relic. So Auger d'Anglure, at the end, more or less in the same moment as Martoni, au plus haut dit celle dicte montagne, a une belle église, belle demeurant en son tour. Again, a beautiful church with a beautiful monastery. On sait l'église a deux autels. There are two altars. C'est à savoir les grands autels, so the main altar of the church, et un autre autel, en une chapelle qui est derrière les grands autels. So now we have a description of another structure which is located behind the main altar, which may also mean to one side of the altar. It's not clear what Auger is describing. Il est au cœur de cette église, nous fut montré un des clos dont notre Seigneur Jésus-Christ fut crucifié en la vraie croix. So, the more pilgrims visit this site, the more they are shown precious mementos connected with the crucifixion. So now even one of the nails of the crucified Christ are shown to the pilgrim, which did not exist in previous description. Derrière la dite chapelle a une autre petite chapelle en laquelle la dite Sainte Croix du Bon Larron. So again, another structure housing the cross of the Good Thief. Et sachez que c'est grand merveille que de voir ici le Sainte Croix, car elle est grande et grosse. So its dimensions are large, it's high and large. Et si se soutient en l'air, it's suspended in the air, sans que l'on puisse l'apercevoir, qu'aucune chose la soutienne. So there is no support, no visible support to this cross. Et quand l'on y touche, elle branle fort. So when you touch it, it makes a movement and it resounds in a very impressive way. c'est merveilleuse chose belle à voir. Well, we can get an idea of how it could look like by glancing at this miraculous cross, which is preserved in a church in Katolevkara, which is a village not far from Stavrovouni. Cyprus houses many stavrothekes, many reliquaries of the Holy Cross shaped in the cross form and riveted with silver, which is more or less what we can infer about the original appearance of the Holy Cross of Stavrovouni, with a central relic located in the very middle at the crossing of the arms. Well, this cross became so famous in the Eastern Mediterranean that it is frequently mentioned even in Muslim sources, and especially in the writings of wise people or philosophers who tried to demonstrate that no form of religious materiality had to be developed in Muslim devotional life. So we are speaking of writers belonging to the Hanbalite school of Muslim law, and they are often disappointed by the fact that many forms of devotion for a material object were diffused in those times in Muslim practice, and they often show that this is something which Muslims ought to avoid, because religious materiality of any kind is something connected with either Christianity or paganism. So they make use of some specific examples, and the cross of Stavrovouni is one of these. So Ghazi al-Wasiti, he was an Egyptian Muslim who was trying to convince the Mamluk Sultan to prevent Copts from being given a job in the Mamluk state. So he said that only real, true Muslims had to be state functionaries and not Copts. And he hints at this Christian tradition to demonstrate that they are pagans in spirit in some way. The story is located in the times of Arab conquest of Cyprus, that is in the 7th century. It's not true, but it anticipates the worship of the Holy Cross of Stavrovouni in a distant past. So it happened in the time of Muawiyah ibn Abu Sufyan, when he sent his army into Cyprus. The Muslim Arabs penetrated into the island of Cyprus and became its rulers. They found in it an iron cross standing upright between two high posts. So the reference is to the fact that the cross is completely riveted in metal. Actually, it was silver, not iron. But anyway, the Arabs wondered at this and how it was able to stand upright without any support. But there was one man among them who had excellent sight. He came forward and pulled up one of the posts. The cross fell over. Attached to this post, there was found a magnetic stone of the greatest possible magnitude, both as regards length and breadth. He then threw down the second post and found the same to be the case with it. The explanation is that the two magnetic stones drew the cross, each to its own side with equal strength, producing an equilibrium so that it did not fall. But when one of the posts fell, the cross was bound to fall also. In such a manner, a fraud that had been practiced became discovered, and what had been done by these cursed leading men among the Christians. People recognized that the whole affair was an insidious fraud. So this is just a first hint. It's not clearly stated that this was the cross of Stavrovuni, but anyway it resounds with reminiscences of the Stavrovuni cross. Later on, this story was exploited in the correspondence that two famous intellectuals of the time, of the Muslim, had with the Cypriot people. So Christians and Muslims were quarreling about the issue of religious materiality. And I insist, in the view of such people, for the Muslim philosophers, the problem was to condemn any form of religious materiality within Islam. But anyway, the hint at Christianity was a way to say that, to accuse their fellow practitioners of following usages associated with Christianity rather than Islam. Well, Ibn Abu Talib al-Dimashqi mentions the cross in a very efficacious way. What is the wisdom? And he condemns in general all usages of Christian materiality because he finds them childish and stupid. So, and he's very rationalist. Basically, Islam can be extremely rationalist, as in this case. What is the wisdom in placing childish things in churches and places of worship, such as the descent of fire on Holy Saturday in the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, the cross being suspended in the air by means of magnets in Cyprus, chrism oil, starlings carrying olives to one of their monasteries, beetles appearing in one of their monasteries, oil gushing forth at Sinai outside Damascus, the eyes of images flowing with tears, and so many things similar to these childish notions that they can hardly be counted. So he condemns many different cult phenomena which were known to Muslim people in the Near East, such as the worship for the incarnated icon of Sinai near Damascus, which was known to power a miraculous oil, but also the fact that Christians believe that images may power water. And they say there is a special technique of making this, and he tries to describe this as a sort of illusionism. And so this is especially interesting because the argument of the Cypriot cross of the good thief suspended in the air by means of magnets became so important that in 1426 the Mamluk army invaded Cyprus and organized an expedition to destroy this cross. And you can imagine that how important it was, especially the cancelled something which was extremely important also for sailors and was directly connected with the needs of navigation. So it was very important for them. And it was a sort of retaliation they made for Peter I of Lusignan's conquest of Alexandria in 1365. So you can imagine how important such objects came to be. Perhaps we tend not to believe that similar objects may have played such an important role, but even in a transcultural dialogue which may be a fighting dialogue, but in any case, if you destroy an object, a cult object, implicitly you recognize its agency, its capacity to play a role in not only in culture or religious life, but also in politics. Huh? So it's a very important point, I think. Yeah.
The description you read this one, by the way, is like, let's say, the description of the district destruction, if it's possible, but we also see the general level. First one, they arrive and they really see the suspended cross, and they are also like completely touched, and then they discover the magnetic stuff. But the first, it's an implicit like recognition of the power of this object which is suspended in the middle of nowhere. So I can really imagine the Muslims who are arriving there, the Mamluks, and they see really this cross like in the middle of nowhere. That must be like a really strong exercise.
Yeah, for sure. And one has also to consider that for the Mamluks and for their predecessor, for Saladin, for example, they had a very clear idea that there was no purpose in destroying Christian shrines, because in the Holy Land, they knew the cult objects were grafted onto the soil. So, for example, when Saladin had to take a decision as to whether he had to destroy the Holy Sepulchre or not, as Al-Hakim had made in the 11th century. And his counselors said, but it makes no matter if you destroy it, because Christians will continue to go there to worship the rock of Golgotha, even if you completely destroy the church around it. So they were perfectly aware that holiness was associated not to the building, but to a portion of earth. In this case, you have an object which can be destroyed. And so the strategy is completely different. And in some way, they recognize that this object is problematic and that it will be a political success for them if they manage to destroy or to bring it away. We don't know anything of its fortune or what happened of it. Okay, and we come to the final argument, the final topic, that is the extent to which Famagusta manages to appropriate worship for a most important saint, a saintly woman, who was worshipped actually not in Famagusta, but in the following port in the navigation of many pilgrims to the Holy Land, that is in Alexandria. And we know that there was a very direct competition between Famagusta and Alexandria. These two ports, regardless of their being associated with a Christian and a Muslim context, were strictly associated because of business. So Famagusta lived out of its connection with Alexandria, which was the most important port in the Mamluk state. And it has been noted in many instances that Catherine became the most important saint in the Lusinian kingdom of Cyprus, and this worship was also even more fostered by the Venetians when they appropriated the island in the late 15th century. So St. Catherine, first of all, it has to be stressed again that St. Catherine was associated with the Holy Land pilgrimage. Worship for St. Catherine had become extremely important for Westerners since the 12th century, since the 11th and 12th century. And the story of St. Catherine was known from many hagiographic texts, all stating or at least for the earliest version stated that she was born in Alexandria and she was martyred in Alexandria. But especially from the 14th century onwards, a number of lectionaries included as completely different versions, which asserted that Catherine was not native of Egypt, yet rather of Famagusta. And this on several grounds. Well, Alexandria was obviously the place which was visited by pilgrims before going to Cairo and obtaining a special permission to get to the Holy Land by crossing the desert or the Sinai Peninsula, which enabled them to make a stop at the Sinai monastery in order to worship not only the biblical side of the revelation to Moses, but also and especially in the perspective of Western pilgrims, the body of Saint Catherine and the place where her body had been kept and watched by an angel for many years. Well, pilgrims were also granted a very important plenary indulgence if they were able to reach the top of Mount Sinai. So you see here the Jebel Catherine, the place where Catherine's body had rested for 500 years, according to local tradition. This is the original sarcophagus of St. Catherine. The peculiarity of this tomb was that a miraculous oil was poured out of the body, and this oil was considered to be extremely efficacious against storms, against any kind of perils in your life, and especially on your way back. Pilgrims who in the late Middle Ages were able to get to the top of Mount Sinai were allowed a very special privilege. They could decorate their garments with a rod of St. Catherine, a spike rod. And you see, for example, in the Jerusalem Kirk in Bruges, which was founded by Anselmo Adorno, a pilgrim we mentioned many times, when he was back, he erected a chapel which was replicating or imitating the appearance of the Golgotha Church. And you see his tomb, where he put the major insignia he had obtained during his pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And you see the cross of Jerusalem on one side and the rod of the wheel of St. Catherine on the other side. This was the were considered major insignia, especially because one could get the status of a knight of Jerusalem and St. Catherine, which was a very special honor one could have. So everywhere in this church, the wheel of St. Catherine and the cross of Jerusalem are repeated also as ornaments. You can find it everywhere. And this was also the very burial chapel for Anselmo Adorno himself. So I was saying that Famagusta and Alexandria and Sinai were connected through common worship for St. Catherine. But obviously, Sinai had some right to pretend to be a major cultic place for the saint. Alexandria could boast of being the place where Catherine had lived, whereas there were very few grounds for pretending that Famagusta had something to do with her, because simply Famagusta did not exist historically in the times of Catherine. But, historical precision is never an important factor in the shaping of cultic phenomena in the Middle Ages. So, if we read again Nicola de Martoni, and I have an English translation, we see how important it was to combine worship for the holy sites in Jerusalem with a full experience of all the sites, of the holy topography of St. Catherine. So Nicola states, and given that with the help of our Lord Jesus Christ, who bestowed this grace on me, I was able to see all those things made and underwent by St. Catherine, vidi omnia facta beate Caterine et gesta per eam. So you see, seeing the site means seeing the events, the deeds of St. Catherine, the local witness to her gestures, to her deeds. So in Alexandria it is about her imprisoning and glorious martyrdom, which she withstood in honor of our Lord Jesus Christ in the wheel located between two columns, as well as in the church where her glorious body was translated on the summit of that high mountain on Mount Sinai, and all sites associated with her precious body translated from that lofty mountain to her church of St. Catherine on the Sinai. I also wished to see the site of her birth, and therefore I went to the aforesaid old town of Constantia, 4 miles far from Famagusta, which was once a big city, built up by Emperor Constantius, father of St. Catherine. Now it is thoroughly destroyed, and I went to a site where there was apparently the castle of that city, looking big enough. In that very place is the now destroyed room where St. Catherine was born, and nearby there is a devout enough chapel which is visited very often by the people of Famagusta with much devotion. So you see, there is a new site which is integrated in the holy topography of St. Catherine. So obviously Alexandria ought to be the main focus of devotion to St. Catherine. But it's a Muslim city, and it's a destroyed city. Basically, you can see many ruins outside the port. There is a small port where all, especially Western merchants, are present, but basically the city was mostly destroyed. One could see the ruins of the old Hellenistic and Roman city, and many along the old canopic way, which still exists in the structure of the present city, which was reconstructed many times. But until Napoleon's times, many columns, porphyry columns, could be seen along the same way. And starting from the 1320s, that is very early, pilgrims identified two of such columns as the supports, the monumental supports of St. Catherine's spiked wheel. And remark that they don't receive any special veneration. So this is not a local cult phenomenon which is being appropriated by pilgrims. It's something which is invented by them, or perhaps by merchants who have to stay in Alexandria for a long time and try and start identifying some of its remnants in connection with the most famous legend associated with this saint. I say that perhaps we know that the merchants had a role because some pilgrims state that they were led to see such places by Venetian or Genoese merchants. So nearby was located also an underground space, and again, you see how important underground spaces are, which pilgrims gradually came to identify as the place where St. Catherine had been imprisoned before being beheaded. But such traditions are reported often in a contradictory, ambiguous way. Nevertheless, when Peter I of Lusignan conquers Alexandria in 1365, his first act is to thank St. Catherine for the help given during the siege, and he asks his priests to perform a mass in front of the columns of the spiked wheel. Then, from time to time, pilgrims remark the presence of the column of Pompeii, actually the only remnants of the old city still in situ, and they figured out that it originally supported one of the idols who fell after St. Catherine's prayers to God. And then they visited the local churches. One church, one Greek church, had an icon which was said to be an image painted by St. Luke. And so again, you could find something you were acquainted with from many similar examples along the sea route to the Holy Land. Well, sometimes some pilgrims allege that St. Catherine's native house was also located in Alexandria in the ruins of the Serapeum. But most of them were said that Catherine was not a native of Alexandria, even if it was universally known as Saint Catherine of Alexandria. But they thought that the native house was located in the ruins of the old city of Constantia, which is more or less here. The Bay of St. Catherine is noted. It is noted in Ghibellino's plan, near, in an area where many